Close your eyes and think about the last meal you ate. Whether it was a perfectly seared steak, a bowl of hot soup, or just a handful of French fries, it almost certainly had one universal ingredient: salt. Today, salt is so incredibly cheap and abundant that we completely take it for granted. It sits in little shakers on every dining table in the world, a mundane mineral that costs pennies. But if you could step into a time machine and travel back 30,000 years, you would discover a world where salt as a standalone white powder didn't exist. There were no salt mines, no boiling pans, and no seasoning shakes. Yet human biology has not changed. Every single cell in your body right now requires sodium chloride to function. Without it, your nervous system cannot transmit electrical signals, your muscles cannot contract, and your heart stops beating. So how did prehistoric humans, wandering a wild and untamed planet, satisfy this absolute biological necessity? They didn't do it by design. They didn't have chemists or geologists to explain what minerals were hidden in the earth. Instead, our ancestors stumbled upon the world's most important seasoning through a series of desperate, accidental, and highly unusual events. This is the story of how ancient humans accidentally discovered salt, and how that accident completely altered the trajectory of human civilization. The carnivore's secret: seamless sodium. To understand how salt was discovered, we first have to understand why early humans didn't need to look for it. For 99% of human history, our ancestors were hypercarnivorous hunters. They tracked and harvested massive Ice Age megafauna: bison, mammoths, wild horses, and deer. When you eat a diet consisting almost entirely of fresh, wild meat, you are accidentally consuming all the salt your body could ever need. Animal blood, flesh, and organs are naturally packed with sodium. The prey animals did the hard work of foraging for minerals across the landscape, concentrating the sodium in their tissues, and humans absorbed it directly by eating them. Because of this carnivorous lifestyle, ancient hunter-gatherers had absolutely no concept of salt as an additive. Their food was seasoned naturally by life itself. But as the Ice Age ended and ecosystems began to shift, a massive dietary revolution was forced upon humanity. And that is when the trouble and the accidents began. 1. The sick herbivore accident. The discovery of salt began with a profound mystery. Why were the animals acting so strange? As human populations grew and large game became scarcer, tribes began relying heavily on foraging for wild grains, roots, and plants. At the exact same time, humans began the early stages of domesticating herbivores like wild sheep, goats, and cattle. Suddenly, the human diet shifted from high-sodium meat to low-sodium vegetation, and the animals humans kept close were eating nothing but grass. Within a few generations, a silent biological crisis struck. Both humans and their domesticated animals began suffering from severe lethargy, muscle cramps, and a mysterious, wasting sickness. They were experiencing extreme sodium deficiency. Then came the accident. A prehistoric herder, desperate to figure out why his goats were sickly and weak, noticed a bizarre behavior. A few of the animals broke away from the herd, running frantically toward an ugly, barren patch of earth where no plants would grow. The goats began aggressively and obsessively licking the white, crusty dirt on the ground. Curious and perhaps a bit desperate, the herder walked over to the barren patch. He knelt down, scraped some of the white crust with his finger, and placed it on his tongue. It didn't taste like dirt. It was sharp, electric, and intensely flavorful. Within days of the animals licking these strange rocks, their sickness vanished. Their energy returned. Humans quickly realized that this magical, crystalline dirt was a literal lifesaver. They had accidentally discovered rock salt licks, the natural geological deposits where ancient oceans had evaporated millions of years prior. 2. The seawater soup accident. While inland tribes were discovering salt through the strange behavior of animals, coastal humans were making an entirely different accidental breakthrough involving the ocean. Coastal hunter-gatherers frequently collected shellfish, seaweed, and fish from the shoreline. To cook their catch, they would scoop up fresh water from local streams, bring it back to camp in hollowed-out gourds or stone bowls, and boil their food over the fire. One evening, a primitive chef made a completely mundane mistake. Perhaps the local freshwater stream had dried up, or perhaps they were simply too exhausted from a long day of foraging to walk all the way inland. Instead of fetching fresh water, they grabbed a container of raw, undulating ocean water from the surf right next to their camp. They dropped their meat and wild roots into the boiling seawater. When the tribe sat down to eat, they expected the usual bland, boiled fare. Instead, they were hit with an explosion of flavor. The seawater had infused the ingredients with a rich, savory depth they had never experienced before. Even better, they noticed that the meat cooked in seawater didn't spoil quite as fast as meat cooked in fresh water. From that day on, cooking with seawater became standard practice. But the real accidental discovery occurred when a container of seawater was left unattended near the edge of a hot campfire cooking ring. Over hours of exposure to the ambient heat, the water slowly hissed and evaporated into the night air. When the campers woke up the next morning, the water was completely gone. In its place, coating the bottom and sides of the stone bowl, was a glittering, snow-white crust of pure, concentrated crystals. When they scraped it off and tasted it, they realized they didn't need to transport heavy sloshing water anymore. They could create the flavor and the medicine in a dry, portable form. 3. The spoiled meat miracle. Though flavor and health were incredible benefits, the absolute greatest accidental discovery involving salt occurred in the realm of food preservation. This single accident changed human history forever. Before salt, storing food was an absolute nightmare. If a tribe successfully hunted a massive wild boar or a bison, they had to gorge themselves on the meat immediately. Within 48 hours, bacteria would colonize the flesh, causing it to rot, smell putrid, and become deadly toxic. One day, a hunting party returned to camp with an abundance of meat. To protect their prized catch from flies and scavenging predators, they decided to store the extra flesh in a nearby cave. By complete accident, they chose a cave that was a natural salt grotto. Its floors and walls were lined with thick layers of powdery, soft rock salt dust. They laid the raw meat directly onto the salty floor, covered it with rocks, and left it behind as they moved camp. Weeks later, a severe winter storm or a sudden famine forced the tribe back to that exact same region. Starving and desperate, they returned to the cave, fully expecting to find a pile of putrid, maggot-infested bones. Instead, they uncovered a miracle. The meat wasn't rotten. It had turned a deep, dark red and felt incredibly tough and dry, but it smelled entirely fresh. The salt on the cave floor had performed a miraculous process called osmosis. It had aggressively drawn all the moisture out of the animal tissues and killed off the bacteria, effectively freezing the meat in time. The hunters bit into the dry, salty meat. It was perfectly edible, highly nutritious, and packed with flavor. Human beings had just stumbled upon the secret to conquering winter. From accident to empire. What started as a series of random accidents quickly turned into the world's very first global industry. The realization that salt could preserve food meant that humans were no longer slaves to the immediate seasons. They could store surpluses of fish, meat, and vegetables. They could survive long marches across trackless deserts and frozen mountains. Because salt was highly concentrated in only a few geological locations, it became the most valuable commodity on Earth. It became the world's first currency, traded ounce for ounce with gold. Entire cities were founded next to salt marshes. Empires fought brutal wars to control salt roads, and Roman soldiers were even paid their wages in salt, a practice that gave birth to the modern word salary. The next time you lightly shake a bit of salt onto your dinner, look closely at those tiny, glittering white cubes. You aren't just looking at a simple seasoning. You are looking at the foundational mineral of human survival, discovered entirely by accident by ancient ancestors who simply followed a line of sick goats, forgot a bowl of seawater by a campfire, and dropped their dinner on a dusty cave floor.